This podcast is made possible by the listener members of Nashville Public Radio.
This is the Nashvillager Podcast. It's October 10th, 2024. On this day in 1492, the crew on a ship called the Santa Maria lost their last thread of patience with Christopher Columbus. The men felt trapped in an impossible task. They feared they were closer to running out of food than they were to making landfall. The grumbling had been going on for a while, but on this day, tensions finally erupted into open mutiny. Columbus managed to retain control, but only by agreeing to a hard limit. If land was not sighted in the next 3 days, the small fleet would turn back for Spain. 2 days later, they made their first landing in the so-called New World. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. Every so often, Tennessee lawmakers try to figure out a way to stage some kind of mutiny against the federal government. There was the really obvious, gigantic one called secession. That didn't end well. But right now, some legislators are talking about making an attempt to nullify specific laws and requirements that they don't like. Last week, a Senate committee held a study session to consider a bill that would create a way for the state to declare a federal measure unconstitutional. And then, once that declaration is made, the proposal says state agencies would be barred from using any of their resources to comply with the federal rules. Now, this bill was introduced more than a year ago. It was pushed off to what's called summer study, and that's what last week's hearing was. And for there to be any real action, someone would need to resubmit the bill after the General Assembly reconvenes in January. It's hardly a sure thing, is what I'm saying. And that's good, because even the experts who are sympathetic to the idea that most federal laws passed are no good say that nullification does not pass constitutional muster. That's what the senators heard during their hearing last week. One constitutional law expert testified that it amounts to secession light. Another emphasized that the way to challenge a federal rule is in the court system, which Tennessee's current attorney general is doing on overdrive. He's filed lawsuits, court briefs, and letters challenging gender-affirming care for minors, certain regulations on AI, health care for immigrants, workplace protections for people who get abortions, trans folks' access to the bathrooms matching their gender, rules governing the private sale of firearms, environmental justice provisions, DEI guidelines for apprenticeship programs. I could go on. Maybe you think I shouldn't have read out so many. But I think it's important to see just how many issues the state is challenging the federal government on right now to put into perspective just how much the state might try to nullify if lawmakers were to go that route. It's a lot. And that's on top of the other tactic being deployed right now by Governor Lee's administration, which we've talked about before on this podcast, refusing federal money in an attempt to get out from under regulations that are tied to that funding. Now, like I said before, this isn't the state's first attempt at mutiny. It isn't even the first time it's considered nullification. 11 years ago, Tennessee lawmakers debated a kind of backdoor method to block the enforcement of federal gun laws. There was talk at the time of a federal assault weapons ban. The idea was to make it a crime in this state for federal law enforcement to enforce that kind of ban. The AG at the time, a different guy from the one we have now, wrote an opinion to say that was not constitutional. After he weighed in, the bill died in the state Senate, but only barely. It was a tie vote. They debated it on the floor for a full hour, and the lawmakers in office back in 2013 weren't quite as on fire to stick it to the federal government as the ones we've got today. The thing is, nullification is something this nation hashed out and squashed a long, long time ago. Or tried to anyway. In fact, it was handled by Tennessee's most famous president. In 1832, during Andrew Jackson's administration, many Southerners believed the federal government was overreaching by charging tariffs, taxes, on imported goods. South Carolina did exactly what the current Tennessee proposal suggests. They declared the tariffs unconstitutional and therefore null and void. They barred anyone from collecting tariffs within their state. Jackson's vice president, South Carolinian John Calhoun, resigned to go lead those nullification efforts. Jackson sent the army to South Carolina. They didn't attack, but they stood ready to do so, if necessary. And Jackson sent a proclamation that has set the tone for constitutional interpretation ever since. He reminded the people of that state that they were part of a larger whole. They weren't only South Carolinians, they were also Americans, which meant that they had to go along with measures that were best for the nation as a whole, even if they didn't always like it. That chapter in the American story was called the Nullification Crisis. Many historians consider it a precursor to the Civil War. So now the question is, how eager are Tennessee's leaders to revive the old nullification doctrine? And when next month's election readjusts the makeup of the General Assembly, will it be a body of legislators who lean even farther into the idea? Or ones who choose to back away? In just a few minutes, this week's third installment of excerpts from our series, Making Noise. That's coming up after the newscast.
Here's the mantra I think about at WPLN. We connect the dots. It captures a mindset that our journalism is not merely about the latest press release or proclamations by officials. Instead, we can develop expertise, dig deeper, and look to history to understand what's happening now. I'm Tony Gonzalez, news director. When I'm planning coverage and editing stories, the best part is being part of a team that's curious about our community and invested in its future.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. More than 5,000 Nashvillians registered to vote on the last day of voter registration this week. The Davidson County Election Commission says it's still processing new voters. Of the absentee ballots sent out, nearly half have already been received by the Election Commission. Early voting in Nashville begins next week. The flooding caused by Hurricane Helene destroyed businesses, homes, and livelihoods in Appalachia. Last week, Justin Hicks, a reporter at our partner station, Kentucky Public Radio, visited East Tennessee. With the help of Knoxville's WUOT, he's able to shine a light on the aftermath of the flooding. While on assignment, he captured a powerful photo of the reality of flood recovery. It shows two women, Rhea Hillebrandt and Jody Hall, holding each other on the floor of a ruined whitewater rafting business in Hartford. Hall owns an ice cream truck that sits in the parking lot and says both the devastation and the help that's come since have been incredible.
It's hard to have words. The emotions are pretty overwhelming, and like I said, there's no words. No words.
Thanks to Kentucky Public Radio for that story. Hicks discusses his takeaways from the aftermath of Helene, and you can find that photo and conversation at WPLN.org. Flooding triggered landslides across the Appalachian region last month. The U.S. Geological Survey has mapped more than 500 landslides so far and may find a few more. WPLN's Caroline Eggers explains.
Of the 500 landslides, about 360 of them affected roads, rivers, and structures. The vast majority of them happened in North Carolina. Tennessee got 15. Landslides are considered a secondary disaster to flooding and have become a greater risk with climate change. When heavy rain fills the pores of soil faster than the water can drain, pressure builds and soil weakens, leading to movement. This type of landslide usually happens fast and can travel far.
The U.S. Geological Survey launched a digital dashboard last week to show where the landslides have been mapped, and you can find more information at our website. Austin Peay State University recently parted ways with a new professor after anonymous internet sleuths alleged he was using social media to promote white supremacy and Nazi ideology. Local news outlet Clarksville Now obtained a copy of the separation agreement. It says the outgoing psychology professor, Logan Smith, cannot file legal charges against the school or publicly criticize it. And it says he will get $56,000 paid in installments through July. Back in 2023, a group that purports to expose fascists wrote an extensive thread on X, formerly known as Twitter, tying Smith to popular alt-right social media accounts. It also shared several videos of a man who appears to be Smith at the 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. That group updated its page on Smith in September to reflect his new position at the university. That spurred dozens of APSU students to protest for his termination. The Nashville Scene reports Smith initially denied any involvement, but later told students he'd been involved in chat groups that, quote, got out of hand. After the protests, the college's president announced the school and teacher mutually agreed to part ways. A new report from the National Transportation Safety Board describes a close call at Nashville's airport last month. 2 jets were instructed to be in the same place at the same time. Thankfully, crisis was averted when the pilots of the Alaska Airlines jet, which was about to take off, spotted the Southwest plane crossing the runway. The Alaska crew aborted their takeoff, applying the brakes so hard that the tires deflated. No one was injured. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. There was a time within the past 2 decades when touring hip-hop and R&B artists tended to skip Nashville, or at least struggle to find a pathway to playing shows here. But as our podcast Making Noise details, that began to change in large part due to the concert promotion company called Love Noise. In this excerpt from the show, senior music writer Julie Height reports that one of the artists who felt the difference on his rise to fame was keyboardist and bandleader PJ Morton.
Even though PJ's played hundreds of shows since the mid-2000s, he still has vivid memories of the crowd that came out that first time. He's at a vastly different place in his career these days.
And the Grammy goes to How Deep Is Your Love? PJ Morton featuring Yaba.
Good morning, PJ Morton.
This is so exciting, man. I got to thank God, first of all, for the gifts, to be able to do what I love for a living.
In 2022, I saw PJ Morton headline downtown Nashville's Ryman Auditorium. People typically refer to the Ryman as the mother church of country music, an honorific that reflects its initial purpose as a house of worship and its former use as the home of the Grand Ole Opry. It's customary, even ritual, for performers who step onto that historic stage now to express a sense of reverence, so much so that I expect to hear it.
What is now called the mother church of country music.
Now that's the mother church right there.
Mother church right here, the Ryman Auditorium.
But PJ made another gesture of respect that night that I haven't stopped thinking about. In the middle of his show, he made a point to thank Love Noise and pivotal figures in the city's soul scene, scanning the room to find them in the crowd. Way back in episode 1, I noted that people at concerts do not usually give any thought to concert promoters. It's not on the radar. And this was the first time I could remember hearing an artist with a national profile and the Grammys to back it up take a moment to recognize a local promotion outfit from the stage. So I wanted to find out why PJ felt the need to do that.
There would be no Ryman show without Love Noise. There's a direct correlation in my mind, and all that just started to rush back because I'm like, how did I get here? And immediately, Love Noise popped in my head. That's how I got here. Not just because I've had a hit record lately or I've won a Grammy lately. This relationship was built long ago.
That's the voice of Grammy-winning keyboardist PJ Morton speaking on our 4-part podcast, Making Noise. The show is hosted by senior music writer Julie Height, and this excerpt was produced by Marquise Munson. You can find the full miniseries on the WNXP podcast feed. Thanks for listening to the Nash Villager podcast. We take this look at Nashville news every weekday. If you like it, go ahead and subscribe on your favorite podcasting app. We're still a new podcast trying to get the word out, so tell a friend or give us a mention on your socials. It would really help. And of course, everything at WPLN News is listener supported. You can become a member at WPLN.org. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one. And we'll catch back up tomorrow.